"We're restructuring, Dexter," said Finnegan Walsh, not even bothering to make eye contact as he slid the severance package across his mahogany desk. The same desk I'd helped him buy when we moved into our first real office 3 years ago. "My name's Dexter Chen. I'm 37 years old, and I was about to be forced out of the company I built from nothing. The same company that would be crawling back to me on their knees within 6 months. The conference room felt like a funeral. Finnegan sat at the head of the table with his newly hired business consultant, some guy named Bartholomew Cross who wore suits that cost more than most people's rent. Cross had been brought in 2 months ago to optimize operations, which apparently meant getting rid of the people who actually built the place. "Dexter, your contributions to Nexus Digital Solutions have been appreciated," Cross said, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses. "But we're moving in a different direction. More corporate structure, less startup mentality." I looked around the room I'd painted myself when we couldn't afford contractors. The whiteboard still had my handwriting on it from yesterday's strategy session. 3 years ago, this company didn't exist. Finnegan had an idea for a digital marketing platform, but no clue how to build it. I was the one who coded the first prototype in my garage, working 18-hour days on energy drinks and determination. I was the one who landed our first client, then our second, then our 20th. I designed the entire back-end architecture that now processed millions of dollars in transactions monthly. I hired half the development team sitting outside this room, people who looked up to me, who trusted my vision. "This is effective immediately," Finnegan added, finally meeting my eyes. There was guilt there, but also something else. Relief, maybe. Like I was a problem he'd been waiting to solve. The severance check sat between us like an insult. 3 months' pay for 3 years of building his dream, for making him wealthy while I took a minimal salary and promised equity that somehow never materialized when the lawyers got involved. "I assume this isn't negotiable," I said quietly. Cross smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Business is business, Dexter. Let me back up and tell you who I am, because context matters here. Dexter Chen, 37, divorced father of one incredible 8-year-old daughter named Luna. I've been coding since I was 12, got my computer science degree from UC Berkeley, and spent 5 years grinding at various tech companies before Finnegan approached me with his grand vision. Back then, I was working at a mid-tier software firm, pulling decent money but feeling dead inside. My marriage to Rebecca had just fallen apart, partly because I worked too much, partly because we wanted different things. She got the house in the divorce, I got weekend custody of Luna and a 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland. When Finnegan pitched his idea for a comprehensive digital marketing platform, I saw an opportunity for something bigger. Not just another job, but a chance to build something meaningful. Something that could set up Luna's future, give me the financial freedom to be the father I wanted to be. Finnegan was the business guy, smooth talker, great with investors, understood market dynamics. I was the technical co-founder, the one who would actually build the product. We shook hands on a 60-40 split, with the understanding that I'd take a reduced salary initially in exchange for equity. Everything was verbal, because we were friends, right? Because startup culture is built on trust and shared vision. The early days were brutal but exhilarating. We worked out of Finnegan's spare bedroom, then a cramped co-working space in downtown San Francisco. I coded for 16 hours a day while he handled pitches and tried to drum up initial funding. I survived on instant ramen and the dream of building something that would change our industry. When we landed our Series A funding, $2.3 million from Redwood Ventures, I thought we'd made it. Finnegan found us real office space in Soma, hired our first employees, bought that mahogany desk. I finally felt like a real entrepreneur, not just another code monkey trading hours for dollars. 3 years later, sitting in that same office watching my creation being stripped away from me, I realized how naive I'd been about the business of business. The writing had been on the wall for months, but I'd been too buried in product development to see it clearly. It started with small things, being excluded from investor meetings, having strategic decisions made without my input, watching Finnegan hire executives who knew nothing about our technology but spoke the language that impressed board members. The final insult came when Cross arrived, Bartholomew Cross with his MBA from Wharton and his track record of streamlining operations at tech startups. Within his first week, he'd identified what he called redundancies in leadership structure and inefficiencies in the technical division. Translation: I was too expensive and too opinionated for their new corporate vision. The board feels that Nexus has outgrown its startup phase, Cross explained to me during what I thought was a casual coffee meeting 3 weeks before my termination. We need professional management, not founder sentiment. Emotional attachment to legacy systems can prevent necessary evolution. Legacy systems. He was talking about the platform I'd architected from scratch, the code that processed over $50 million in client transactions annually. The same platform that had zero downtime in the past 18 months, that scaled seamlessly as we grew from 5 clients to over 200. But Cross had identified several areas for improvement. He wanted to migrate everything to a cheaper cloud provider, outsource development to offshore teams, and implement corporate management structures that would eliminate what he called founder dependencies. The real kicker? Finnegan nodded along with everything Cross said like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. The same Finnegan who used to call me at midnight with technical questions, who relied on my judgment for every major platform decision, who once told me I was the smartest person he'd ever worked with. "You have to understand, Dexter," Finnegan said after that meeting. "Investors want predictability. They want processes and structures, not brilliant individuals. Companies need to be bigger than any one person." I should have seen it coming when my access to financial reports got restricted, when my signature was removed from key vendor contracts, when the new CTO they hired, some corporate veteran named Harrison Polk, started asking pointed questions about documentation and knowledge transfer. They were systematically removing my fingerprints from the company I'd built, preparing for the day when Dexter Chen would be just a footnote in Nexus Digital Solutions' origin story. 3 years. That's 1,095 days of my life poured into building something I believed would secure my future and Luna's. But it wasn't just time. It was everything I had. When Finnegan and I started Nexus, I liquidated my entire 401k to fund the initial development. $47,000 that I'd been saving since my early 20s, gone in the first 6 months to keep us afloat while Finnegan hunted for investors. I took a salary cut from $110,000 at my previous job to $65,000 at Nexus, with the promise that equity would make up the difference. I worked nights, weekends, holidays. While other fathers were coaching Little League or attending school plays, I was debugging code and architecting databases. Luna spent countless weekends at the office with me, coloring at a spare desk while I optimized server performance. She learned to fall asleep to the sound of typing, became familiar with terms like deployment and user authentication before she could properly ride a bike. Sarah, my ex-wife, constantly reminded me that I was missing Luna's childhood for a fantasy startup that probably won't succeed. The guilt was crushing, but I held on to the vision of the future I was building, a future where Luna could attend any college she wanted, where I could afford the house with the big backyard she'd always talked about. I'd invested more than money and time. I'd invested my identity. I became known in the San Francisco tech scene as the guy who built the Nexus platform. Other startups tried to poach me. Recruiters called weekly with opportunities at Google, Facebook, smaller companies that wanted my expertise. I turned them all down because I believed in what we were building. The technical achievements were extraordinary. I'd created a machine learning algorithm that optimized ad spending for our clients, increasing their ROI by an average of 34%. The platform could handle complex multi-channel campaigns across social media, search engines, and traditional digital advertising, all managed through an intuitive interface that non-technical users actually enjoyed using. Industry publications wrote articles about our innovations. I spoke at conferences, sharing insights about scalable architecture and user experience design. My LinkedIn profile became a case study in technical leadership at early-stage companies. But none of that mattered when Cross showed Finnegan a spreadsheet demonstrating how much money they could save by replacing me with offshore developers and corporate-approved management systems. The first 2 years at Nexus were magical, the kind of startup experience that tech blogs romanticize. Finnegan and I operated like true partners, making every major decision together, sharing the stress and celebrating every small victory. When we landed our first paying client, a boutique marketing agency called Stellar Creative, I remember Finnegan and I high-fiving in our cramped office like we'd just won the lottery. It was only a $2,000 monthly contract, but it proved that our platform worked, that real businesses would pay for what we'd built. Those early client meetings were incredible. I'd demonstrate the platform's capabilities while Finnegan handled the business discussions. We complemented each other perfectly. I'd explain how our machine learning algorithms could optimize their ad spend, and Finnegan would translate that into revenue projections and ROI metrics that made sense to marketing directors. By month 6, we had 12 clients and growing demand. Finnegan started talking about expansion, about hiring our first employees, about the day when we'd ring the bell at an IPO. I bought into that vision completely. We were going to build something significant, something that would change how mid-sized businesses approached digital marketing. The Series A funding felt like validation of everything we'd worked toward. Redwood Ventures didn't just give us money, they gave us credibility. Suddenly, we were a real company with real resources and real potential. I remember the day we signed the lease on our Soma office, how proud I felt walking through the empty space, imagining the team we'd build there. I trusted Finnegan completely during this period. When he suggested we formalize our partnership agreement eventually, I didn't push. When he handled all investor communications while I focused on product development, it seemed like a natural division of labor. When he started talking about bringing in professional management, when we're ready to scale, I assumed that meant years down the road. The platform kept evolving, getting better, handling more complex campaigns. Our client retention rate was 94%. Customer satisfaction scores averaged 4.7 out of 5. We were solving real problems for real businesses, and I felt like I was finally doing work that mattered. Luna was proud of me too. She'd tell her friends that her dad was building a company that someday it might be famous. I promised her that all the long hours would pay off, that we were building something that would give her opportunities I never had. Those were the days when I believed that talent and dedication were enough, that building something great would naturally lead to being rewarded for it. The first crack in my trust appeared 8 months ago when I accidentally discovered that Finnegan had been in talks with acquisition-hungry competitors without mentioning it to me. I found out during a casual conversation with Elena Rodriguez, our head of client success, who mentioned how exciting it must be to have companies like Amplify Digital interested in acquiring us. "What acquisition talks?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Elena looked confused. "Finnegan didn't tell you? He's been meeting with their business development team for weeks. I figured as co-founder you'd be involved in those discussions." When I confronted Finnegan about it, he brushed it off as preliminary market research and keeping our options open. But something about his explanation felt rehearsed, like he'd been preparing for this conversation. "I didn't want to distract you from development work," he said. "You know how you get when business stuff interrupts your coding flow. I was just gathering information." Red flag number 2 came when our legal counsel, Morrison & Associates, started asking me detailed questions about intellectual property ownership and technical documentation. They needed to understand who created what and when for their records. I assumed it was standard corporate housekeeping until I realized that Finnegan wasn't being asked the same questions. The most alarming discovery happened by accident. I was working late one Thursday night when I needed to access our financial dashboard to check our server hosting costs. My access had been revoked. When I asked Finnegan about it the next morning, he claimed it was a security audit recommendation from our new cybersecurity consultant. "Everyone's access is being reviewed and updated," he explained. "Even mine got temporarily restricted last week." But I noticed that Harrison Polk, our newly hired CTO, seemed to have full access to everything. Harrison, who'd been with the company for exactly 6 weeks and still needed my help understanding basic platform architecture. The pattern became clear when I started paying attention. Gradually, systematically, I was being excluded from strategic decisions while being increasingly burdened with tactical execution. Board meetings happened without me. Investor updates were prepared without my input. Contract negotiations with major clients proceeded without my involvement. Yet, whenever there was a technical crisis, whenever the platform needed emergency fixes or performance optimization, suddenly I was essential again. I was the person they called at 2 a.m. when servers crashed, the one they needed when clients reported issues. Cross's arrival was the final confirmation that something bigger was happening. Within days of joining Nexus, he had access to information that had been restricted from me for months. He knew our financial projections, our investor commitments, our strategic roadmap, details I'd been told were need to know, and apparently I didn't need to know. The moment of absolute clarity came 3 days before my termination. during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. I was working late again, trying to finish a critical platform update before our biggest client presentation the following week. Most of the office was empty, except for the cleaning crew and apparently Finnegan and Cross, who were having what they thought was a private meeting in the conference room. I'd gone to the kitchen to grab another coffee when I heard my name mentioned. The conference room door was slightly ajar, and voices carry in our open-plan office layout more than people realize. "The transition needs to be seamless," Cross was saying. "Dexter can't suspect anything until we're ready to move. We need complete documentation of his systems first." "How long do you think that will take?" Finnegan asked. His voice sounded different, colder, more calculating than the partner I thought I knew. "Harrison says he needs another 2 weeks to understand the core architecture. The offshore team has been studying Dexter's code for a month, but there are still dependencies they're working through. Once we have full technical documentation and the platform migration plan, we can proceed." My blood turned to ice. They'd been planning this for months. While I was working 16-hour days to meet client deadlines, they were systematically preparing to replace me with cheaper alternatives. "What about the equity situation?" Finnegan asked. Cross's laugh was sharp and unpleasant. "That's the beauty of keeping everything verbal. Without formal documentation, it becomes very difficult to prove ownership claims. Our legal team has already prepared the necessary paperwork to restructure founder equity based on current operational value rather than historical contribution." "And if he fights it?" "He won't. He's got a daughter, custody payments, a lifestyle to maintain. He needs immediate income more than he needs a legal battle that could take years and cost him everything. We're offering a generous severance package and a clean reference. Most people in his position take the deal and move on." I stood frozen in that kitchen for what felt like an eternity, listening to them discuss my future like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person who'd built everything they were planning to profit from. They talked about my financial vulnerabilities, my relationship with Luna, my professional reputation, all calculated factors in their strategy to remove me as cheaply and quietly as possible. The worst part was hearing Finnegan's voice, completely devoid of the friendship and respect I thought we'd built over 3 years. This wasn't a difficult business decision for him. It was a chess move he'd been planning for months. I quietly walked back to my desk, saved my work, and left the building. I drove home in complete silence, my mind crystal clear for the first time in months. Everything made sense now. Every excluded meeting, every restricted access, every new hire who didn't quite fit our culture. It had all been preparation for this moment. That night, I did something I should have done years ago. I reviewed every email, every legal document, every contract I'd signed since joining Nexus. I wanted to understand exactly what I was facing before they made their move. After hearing that conversation, I had 3 days to prepare for what I knew was coming. 3 days to decide who I wanted to be when they tried to force me out of the company I'd built. I could accept their severance package quietly, take my generous reference letter, and spend the next 6 months interviewing at other companies where I'd be just another senior developer. Or I could make a different choice. Saturday morning, while Luna was at her mom's house, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing. Not my resume, not a job search strategy, but a detailed analysis of exactly how valuable I was to Nexus Digital Solutions. The numbers were staggering. I'd personally written 78% of the core platform code. I held the relationships with 6 of our 10 largest clients who'd specifically requested to work with me during their contract negotiations. I was the only person who fully understood the machine learning algorithms that gave us our competitive advantage. I was listed as the primary inventor on 3 patent applications that were currently pending. More importantly, I realized that I'd been thinking about this entire situation wrong. I wasn't just an employee being fired. I was a co-founder being squeezed out of a company that couldn't function without me. The power dynamic was completely different once I framed it correctly. Sunday afternoon, I made 3 phone calls that would change everything. The first was to Jennifer Kim, a tech attorney who specialized in founder disputes. I'd met her at a startup networking event 2 years earlier. Jennifer listened to my situation and asked one crucial question. Do you want to fight for what's rightfully yours, or do you want to move on and build something new? What if I could do both? I asked. The second call was to Marcus Washington, a client success manager at Zenith Technologies, our second largest client. Marcus and I had worked closely together for over a year, optimizing their digital marketing campaigns and saving them approximately $200,000 annually compared to their previous provider. Marcus, hypothetically, if I were to leave Nexus and start my own platform, would Zenith be interested in discussing a partnership? Dexter, are you kidding? We've been hoping you'd go independent for months. Finnegan's been pushing these corporate account managers on us who don't understand our business half as well as you do. The third call was to Dr. Priya Sharma, the CTO at Redwood Ventures, the firm that led our Series A funding. Priya and I had developed a professional relationship during their due diligence process, where she'd been impressed by the technical sophistication of our platform. Priya, I need you to know that there might be some significant changes at Nexus in the coming weeks. Changes that could affect the platform's technical capabilities and client relationships. By Sunday evening, I had a plan, not just for surviving my termination, but for turning it into the opportunity I should have pursued years earlier. Monday morning, I walked into that conference room ready for whatever Finnegan and Cross thought they were going to do to me. When Cross finished his business is business speech and slid that severance package across the table, I didn't touch it. I just looked at both of them for a long moment, then spoke in the calmest voice I could manage. I'll need to review this with my attorney before signing anything. Finnegan's eyebrows shot up. Attorney? Dexter, this is a standard package. 3 months' salary, continued health benefits, and a positive reference letter. It's more than generous. I'm sure it is, I said. But given the complexity of my role here and my co-founder status, I want to make sure I understand all the implications. Cross leaned forward, his corporate smile slipping slightly. Mr. Chen, let's be clear about something. This transition is happening regardless. The question is whether it happens smoothly, with everyone's professional reputation intact, or whether it becomes complicated and unpleasant for all parties involved. The threat was barely veiled. I nodded thoughtfully. Bartholomew, can I ask you something? In your assessment of our operations, how long do you think it would take to fully transition my responsibilities to other team members? We've been preparing for that transition for several weeks, Cross replied confidently. Harrison has been documenting your processes, and we have offshore development resources ready to handle ongoing technical needs. I smiled. That's interesting. And you feel confident that Harrison understands the core architecture well enough to handle client escalations and system emergencies? Finnegan jumped in. Harrison is extremely qualified. He's got 15 years of experience in enterprise software development. Absolutely, I agreed. Enterprise software is definitely different from our platform. Has he had a chance to review the machine learning algorithms that handle our automated optimization features? The pause was telling. Cross glanced at Finnegan, who looked uncomfortable. I'm sure he'll get up to speed quickly, Finnegan said. Of course, and what about client relationships? I know several of our major accounts specifically requested to work with me. Have you prepared communication strategies for transitioning those relationships? And another pause. These were details they hadn't fully considered, despite months of planning. Dexter, Cross said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. You seem to be misunderstanding the situation. This isn't a negotiation. Your employment with Nexus Digital Solutions is being terminated. You can accept the severance package and maintain professional relationships, or you can make this difficult and potentially damage your reputation in the industry. I stood up slowly, still not touching the paperwork. Gentlemen, I appreciate the offer, but I'm going to need some time to consider my options. My attorney will be in touch within 48 hours to discuss the terms of my departure and any ongoing obligations related to intellectual property, client relationships, and co-founder equity. Finnegan's face went pale. Dexter, there's no need to involve lawyers. We're all professionals here. Exactly, I said. Which is why I want to make sure this transition is handled professionally and legally. I'll clean out my desk this afternoon and work remotely while we sort out the details. Cross was clearly frustrated. Mr. Chen, I strongly advise you not to overcomplicate a straightforward business decision. Companies restructure. Employees transition. This is normal. I reached the door and turned back one final time. You're absolutely right, Bartholomew. Business is business. Walking out of that conference room felt like emerging from underwater. For the first time in months, I could breathe clearly. My phone was buzzing with text messages from colleagues who'd already heard rumors about restructuring, but I ignored them. I had work to do. My first stop was Elena Rodriguez's desk. Elena had been with us for 2 years, managing client relationships with a skill that rivaled account managers at companies twice our size. She looked up when I approached, her expression concerned. "Dexter, is it true what people are saying about layoffs?" "Elena, can we grab coffee? There's something I need to discuss with you." 20 minutes later, sitting in the Starbucks across from our office, I laid out the situation honestly. Elena listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from surprise to anger to something that looked like relief. "I've been waiting for this conversation for months," she finally said. "Ever since Cross arrived, everything's felt wrong. He doesn't understand our clients, he doesn't understand our platform, and he definitely doesn't understand what makes this company work." "What if I told you there might be an alternative?" I asked. "Something that would let us keep doing the work we love without the corporate politics." Elena's eyes lit up. "Are you thinking about starting something new?" My second conversation was with James Liu, our lead developer and the person who understood my code better than anyone else on the team. James had been getting increasingly frustrated with Harrison Polk's management style and the new corporate development processes that were slowing down everything we tried to build. "They want me to rewrite the entire authentication system using their preferred framework," James told me over lunch. "It's going to take 3 months and make everything less secure, but Harrison says it's more industry standard." "What if you didn't have to do that?" I asked. By the end of the week, I had informal commitments from Elena, James, and 2 other key team members who were interested in exploring new opportunities. Not to sabotage Nexus, but to build something better. Jennifer Kim, my attorney, had reviewed my situation and delivered news that was better than I'd hoped. Because I'd been operating as a co-founder from day one, and because I could prove my essential role in building the company's core assets, I had legitimate claims to both equity and intellectual property. More importantly, my non-compete agreement was poorly written and probably unenforceable. "The key thing," Jennifer explained, "is that you can't steal proprietary technology or breach client confidentiality, but you can absolutely build competing software using your own knowledge and experience. And if clients choose to work with you instead of Nexus, that's their business decision." The third piece of good news came from Marcus Washington at Zenith Technologies. Not only was Zenith interested in working with my future company, but they were willing to provide a letter of intent that would help me secure initial funding. 3 other clients expressed similar interest when I reached out discreetly. Within 2 weeks of my termination, I had the foundation for a new company, Apex Digital Solutions. Better team, better clients, better technology, and complete ownership of my own destiny. But the real satisfaction would come from watching Nexus try to function without the people who actually built it. The first sign that Nexus was in trouble came exactly 3 weeks after my departure. Luna was spending the weekend with me when my phone started buzzing with frantic calls from numbers I recognized. Nexus clients experiencing platform issues. I didn't answer, but I did check social media and industry forums. Nexus's usually reliable platform was experiencing intermittent service disruptions. Their status page showed 3 separate outages in 2 weeks, something that had never happened while I was there. Elena, who had given her notice the day after our coffee conversation, texted me updates from inside the company. Harrison tried to implement a quick fix for the authentication system. Crashed the entire platform for 4 hours. Finnegan looked like he was going to have a heart attack. The real carnage started in month 2. Morrison Industries, one of our oldest and most valuable clients, canceled their contract after a billing error that overcharged them by $50,000. The error happened because Harrison's team didn't understand the complex pricing algorithms I'd built to handle their multi-tier service structure. Zenith Technologies followed 2 weeks later, citing declining service quality and lack of responsive technical support. Marcus Washington was diplomatic in his exit interview, but word spread quickly through the industry that Nexus was struggling to maintain the technical excellence that had built their reputation. By month 3, Cross was calling emergency board meetings to address what he termed temporary technical challenges, and client transition issues. According to Elena, who was finishing her final weeks before joining my new company, Finnegan had started asking detailed questions about contacting me for consulting support. The offshore development team that was supposed to replace my expertise was drowning. They could handle basic maintenance and simple feature requests, but they couldn't troubleshoot complex issues or optimize the machine learning algorithms that drove client results. Several major campaigns failed because the automated optimization features stopped working correctly. Industry publications started noticing. TechCrunch ran a story titled, "When Startup Growth Strategies Backfire, Nexus Digital's Technical Troubles." The article quoted several former clients who described platform issues and communication problems that had led them to switch providers. But the most satisfying moment came in month 4, when Jennifer Kim forwarded me an email from Morrison & Associates, Nexus's legal team. They wanted to discuss potential consulting arrangements for technical advisory services. Translation: they needed me back, and they were willing to pay premium rates for access to knowledge they'd thrown away. Dr. Priya Sharma from Redwood Ventures called me directly that same week. "Dexter, I'm hearing concerning things about Nexus's technical stability. As their lead investor, I'm wondering if you might be available for a conversation about the platform's current state." I told her I'd be happy to discuss it, at my standard consulting rate of $300 per hour, with a minimum engagement of 40 hours. The phone calls started coming weekly after that, not just from Finnegan, but from Cross, from board members, from panicked clients who had my personal contact information. I didn't answer any of them. I was too busy building something better. 6 months after my termination, I was in the middle of a client presentation for Nexus Digital Solutions when my assistant knocked on the conference room door. "Dexter, sorry to interrupt, but you have an urgent call from Finnegan Walsh." I excused myself and took the call in my office, putting it on speaker so Elena and James could hear. Finnegan's voice sounded strained, almost desperate. "Dexter, we need to talk. The board is concerned about the technical challenges we've been facing, and we think there might be an opportunity for you to return in a consulting capacity." I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window of our new office space in Palo Alto. Apex had grown to 12 employees in 6 months. We had 15 major clients, and our platform was generating better results than Nexus ever had. "Finnegan, that's interesting. What kind of consulting are you thinking about?" "Full technical oversight, complete authority over platform development, competitive compensation package. We could even discuss equity restoration as part of a long-term partnership." The irony was perfect. Everything they'd refused to give me as a co-founder, they were now offering to get me back as a consultant. "What happened to Harrison?" I asked. "I thought he was handling technical operations." A long pause. "Harrison's role has been adjusted. It turns out that enterprise software experience doesn't directly translate to our platform's unique architecture." Elena was trying not to laugh. James was shaking his head in amazement. "And Cross? Is he still optimizing operations?" "Bartholomew's contract ended last month. The board felt his recommendations weren't achieving the expected results." I let the silence stretch for a moment, considering my response. "Finnegan, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available for consulting work. I'm building my own company now, and frankly, it's going better than I ever imagined." "Dexter, please, we both know that Nexus was our shared vision. What we built together." "What I built," I corrected gently, "and what you decided you could manage without me." Another pause. When Finnegan spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I made a mistake. Cross convinced me that we needed a corporate structure, that founders were liabilities in a scaling company. I should have trusted my instincts about our partnership." "Maybe," I said. "But you didn't just make a business mistake, Finnegan. You made a character choice. You chose to betray someone who trusted you instead of having an honest conversation about our company's future." I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "Dexter, is there anything I can do to fix this?" I thought about Luna, who was proud that her dad had built his own company. I thought about my team at Apex, who trusted me to lead with integrity. I thought about the clients who chose us because they valued authentic relationships over corporate efficiency. "The best thing you can do," I said finally, "is learn from this experience, treat people better, honor your commitments, build something that lasts." I hung up and turned to Elena and James. "So," Elena said with a grin, "I guess that's what karma looks like in the tech industry." 6 months later, Nexus Digital Solutions was acquired by a larger marketing automation company for less than half their previous valuation. Finnegan took a mid-level position at the acquiring firm. The last I heard, he was doing well but had learned some expensive lessons about the difference between managing people and leading them. As for me, Apex Digital Solutions became everything I'd dreamed Nexus could be, a place where innovation thrived, where people were valued, and where success was built on merit rather than politics. Sometimes the best revenge really is just building something better.